At Kate's birthday dinner, Mom raised her glass and declared, "To Kate, the daughter I'm truly proud of." Then the waiter handed me a $2,000 bill, and I finally snapped. The words hit me like a physical blow. 26 years of being the invisible daughter, the reliable one who paid for everyone else's celebrations. And here I was again, publicly humiliated while Kate basked in praise she hadn't earned. My hands shook as I stared at that bill, the numbers blurring through my rage. $2,000 for a party I hadn't planned, for a sister who'd never worked a day in her life. Meanwhile, my mother announced to a room full of relatives that Kate was her only source of pride. I felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't just about money. This was about 26 years of systematic erasure, of being treated like the family ATM, while Kate got endless applause for breathing. The humiliation burned through my chest, but underneath it, something cold and calculating began to emerge. I'm a financial analyst at Brennan & Associates, one of the top investment firms in Chicago. I spend my days identifying patterns, calculating risks, and developing strategies that save or cost companies millions. And suddenly, I was looking at my family situation with the same analytical clarity I brought to hostile corporate takeovers. Mom was still smiling expectantly at me, completely confident that I'd swallow this humiliation like I always had. Kate was posing for photos, diamond bracelet catching the light. The bracelet I'd helped pay for last Christmas when she claimed she was broke. Dad was studying his wine glass, refusing to meet my eyes like he always did when Mom orchestrated these public displays of favoritism. The relatives were watching this performance they'd seen dozens of times before, waiting for me to dutifully open my wallet and disappear into the background again. But I wasn't the desperate college student working 3 jobs anymore. I wasn't the recent graduate eating ramen for dinner, because every spare dollar went to my family's endless demands. I was pulling down $180,000 a year, had $47,000 in savings, owned my downtown condo outright, and had enough professional connections to destroy someone's financial life if I chose to. Most importantly, I had detailed records of every cent my family had extracted from me over the years. Because when you're a financial analyst, you track everything. I set down the bill without opening my wallet. Time to show my family exactly who they'd been underestimating. My professional background had taught me that successful strategy requires understanding your opposition's weaknesses and your own advantages. As head analyst for Brennan & Associates' corporate restructuring division, I specialized in identifying financial vulnerabilities and exploiting them systematically. My clients included major corporations facing hostile takeovers or fraud investigations. I knew how to trace money, document patterns of financial abuse, and present evidence that destroyed reputations. More importantly, I had resources my family couldn't imagine. My managing partner, David Brennan, owed me significant favors after I'd uncovered the accounting irregularities that saved his biggest client from a $50 million fraud lawsuit. My neighbor, Patricia Hoffman, was a family law attorney who specialized in financial abuse cases and had mentioned over coffee that my family's treatment of me constituted textbook economic exploitation. My college friend Michael worked for the IRS and had casually mentioned that gift taxes applied to loans that were never repaid, especially when the pattern suggested systematic financial manipulation. I'd also been documenting everything for years without really thinking about it. Every Venmo request, every emergency that required my immediate financial intervention, every family event where I was expected to pay while Kate was praised. It was all in my financial records. My monthly budget spreadsheets going back 7 years showed exactly how much my family had extracted. $73,000 in direct payments, plus approximately $31,000 in meals, gifts, and events like tonight. Over $100,000 of my hard-earned money had subsidized Kate's lifestyle, while my parents proclaimed her their success story. Most telling was my employment history compared to Kate's. I had stellar references from every job since high school, a master's in finance from Northwestern, professional certifications in investment analysis and corporate restructuring, and a reputation in Chicago's financial district as someone you didn't want as an enemy. Kate had a communications degree she'd barely earned, no employment history beyond a series of failed influencer attempts, and a complete financial dependence on our parents, who were, in turn, increasingly dependent on me. The power dynamic my family assumed existed was completely false. They saw me as the reliable workhorse who'd always caved to guilt and family pressure. In reality, I was the only one with actual skills, professional connections, financial independence, and detailed records of their exploitation. They were about to learn the difference. I also had something they'd never expected, a complete lack of emotional investment in maintaining their illusion. For years, I'd convinced myself that keeping the peace was worth the cost. But sitting in that restaurant, watching my mother perform her favorite ritual of publicly humiliating me while elevating Kate, I realized I felt nothing but strategic clarity. They'd killed my emotional attachment through years of systematic mistreatment. Now they were just a problem to be solved professionally. My phone buzzed with a text from David Brennan about Monday's client presentation. Seeing his name reminded me of exactly how many powerful people would take my calls if I needed them. My family thought they were dealing with the desperate girl who'd once begged them for textbook money. They were actually about to face someone who'd spent 5 years learning how to destroy people who got in my way. I smiled at my mother and picked up the bill. "You know what, Mom? You're absolutely right. It's time I paid what I actually owe." Over the next 72 hours, I systematically dismantled the financial structure that enabled my family's treatment of me. This wasn't emotional payback. It was a calculated restructuring designed to permanently shift the power balance. First, I called Patricia Hoffman and scheduled an emergency consultation. As a family law attorney specializing in financial abuse, she'd been horrifying me with stories about my family's behavior for months. When I laid out my documentation, her reaction was immediate. "Clara, this is textbook economic abuse. The pattern of exploitation, the public humiliation designed to ensure compliance, the systematic financial extraction. I could get a restraining order based on this evidence alone." She spent 3 hours reviewing my records and identified 17 separate incidents that qualified as financial coercion under Illinois law. More importantly, she confirmed what I'd suspected. My parents' tax returns likely showed significant unreported income from my contributions, especially the cash I'd been giving them for Kate's various crises. "Your sister's lifestyle has been subsidized by unreported gifts that put your parents at serious legal risk," she explained. "The IRS considers systematic family financial arrangements like this to be taxable income, especially when there's clear documentation of the pattern." Patricia drafted a formal cease and desist letter documenting the financial abuse and demanding immediate repayment of all loans. She also prepared a detailed report suitable for IRS submission, though she recommended that as a final escalation tool. The legal foundation was set, but I wanted to give them a chance to respond appropriately first. Next, I called Michael at the IRS. Our conversation was carefully professional, but when I described the situation in hypothetical terms, his guidance was crystal clear. If someone were systematically receiving money from a family member to support their lifestyle, especially unreported cash gifts exceeding $15,000 annually, that's absolutely taxable income. The IRS is particularly interested in cases where there's clear documentation of financial manipulation or coercion. He sent me the relevant tax code sections and documentation requirements. Everything I'd given my parents over the years qualified as reportable gifts, which they'd never declared. Kate's allowance from our parents, funded by my contributions, created a paper trail that put all 3 of them at significant legal risk. Then I made the most important call, David Brennan, my managing partner. I explained that I was dealing with a family financial situation that required strategic consultation. David had built Brennan and Associates by understanding that personal and professional power were interconnected. He was fascinated by my systematic approach. Clara, you've been subsidizing their lifestyle while they publicly diminish you? That's not family. That's exploitation with emotional manipulation. His advice was ruthlessly practical. Document everything. Establish clear boundaries with professional consequences for violations, and never let emotional attachment override strategic thinking. You have resources they can't match. Use them. Most crucially, David offered to make calls on my behalf if needed. Having a managing partner at one of Chicago's top financial firms in my corner changed everything. My family thought they were pressuring an isolated daughter. They were actually about to face someone with serious institutional backing. I spent Saturday creating what I privately called Project Independence, a comprehensive strategy to permanently end my family's financial exploitation. The plan had 3 phases: immediate boundary enforcement, systematic consequence escalation, and definitive relationship restructuring. Phase 1 involved cutting off all financial support immediately. No more surprise bills. No more emergency loans. No more funding Kate's lifestyle through our parents. I drafted a professional email explaining that my financial contributions to the family were ending permanently, effective immediately. Any future family events would require separate checks. No exceptions. Phase 2 was prepared but not yet implemented. Formal legal action. Patricia had prepared comprehensive documentation of the financial abuse pattern, IRS reporting guidelines for the unreported gifts, and a formal demand for repayment of all loans. If my family tried to guilt, manipulate, or publicly humiliate me into resuming their subsidy, these documents would be filed immediately. Phase 3 was the nuclear option. Complete social and financial exposure. David had helped me understand that my parents' position in their social circle was entirely dependent on Kate's perceived success. Success that was actually funded by my income. If necessary, I was prepared to document publicly exactly how Kate's lifestyle was subsidized, including detailed financial records and legal filings. The beauty of the strategy was its complete reversibility based on their response. If they accepted the new boundaries respectfully, we could rebuild on equal terms. If they tried to manipulate or pressure me, the consequences would escalate systematically until the relationship ended permanently. Either way, I'd never again fund my own humiliation. By Sunday evening, I felt completely calm. 26 years of emotional manipulation had taught them that I'd always cave to family pressure. They were about to discover that their financial lifeline had developed professional-grade resistance to their tactics. The consequences began immediately and escalated exactly as I'd calculated. Monday morning, my parents received Patricia's formal cease and desist letter via certified mail, followed by my detailed email explaining the end of all financial support. Mom called within an hour, her voice shaking with rage. "Clara, what is this legal nonsense? We're your family." "You're my family when it's convenient for you," I replied calmly. "When you want money or someone to pay Kate's bills, but when you want to show pride or give praise, suddenly I'm invisible. That arrangement is over." Dad called next, trying his usual manipulation tactics. "Sweetheart, your mother is very upset. Can't we work this out without involving lawyers?" His voice had the same condescending tone he'd used when I was 16 and begging for textbook money. "Dad, I spent 26 years trying to work this out. The time for discussion ended when Mom publicly humiliated me to pay for Kate's party. You both made your priorities clear." By Wednesday, the financial pressure was showing. Kate called, sobbing, because our parents couldn't cover her rent this month. Rent they'd been paying with money I'd been giving them for her various emergencies. "Clara, please, I don't understand what's happening. Mom says you're trying to destroy the family." "Kate, I'm not trying to destroy anything. I'm simply not paying for your lifestyle anymore. You're 24 years old with no job and no skills because our parents enabled that with my money. Figure it out." The beauty of the situation was its mathematical precision. I'd calculated that approximately 60% of my parents' discretionary income was coming from my contributions, either directly or through the assumption that I'd cover family expenses. Without that subsidy, they couldn't maintain Kate's allowance, cover her various crises, or fund the lifestyle that supported their social status. By Friday, David reported that Mom had actually called Brennan and Associates, demanding to speak to my supervisor about my unprofessional behavior toward family. Reception had transferred her to David, who'd professionally but firmly explained that my personal financial decisions were entirely appropriate and that any further harassment of company employees would be reported to authorities. Now, your mother seemed shocked that you have institutional backing, David mentioned with amusement. She clearly expected me to pressure you into submission. Instead, I told her that your strategic thinking and professional boundaries were exactly why you're succeeding in your career. The weekend brought the escalation I'd predicted. Mom sent a group text to extended family explaining that I was selfishly abandoning my sister in her time of need and asking for intervention. Several relatives called me, but instead of guilt, most expressed confusion about why I'd been subsidizing Kate's lifestyle for years. My Aunt Rebecca was particularly direct. Clara, I had no idea you were paying for all those family dinners and Kate's expenses. That's not normal family support, that's exploitation. Your parents should be ashamed they let it go on so long. The social consequences were beginning to mirror the financial ones. Extended family was questioning the narrative my parents had maintained about Kate's success and my role as the reliable but lesser daughter. The truth was significantly more complicated and far less flattering to them. Most satisfying was Kate's complete inability to adapt. She'd never developed basic adult skills because everything had been provided. When she applied for retail jobs, she lasted less than a week each time, claiming the work was beneath her education level. She'd been raised to believe she was special. Reality was failing to cooperate. By the third week, my parents' requests had shifted from demands to bargaining to begging. Dad offered to compromise by paying for family dinners themselves if I'd resume the emergency loans for Kate. When I declined, Mom actually offered to publicly apologize for the birthday dinner incident if I'd help them through this transition period. The word transition was particularly telling. They still believed this was temporary, that eventually I'd return to funding their preferred family dynamic. They couldn't comprehend that I'd permanently removed myself from their financial system. 3 months later, the restructuring was complete and irreversible. Kate had finally found employment at a local salon, working as a receptionist for $14 an hour. The job was a massive shock to her system, but she was slowly developing basic work ethic and life skills. She'd moved into a small apartment with 2 roommates and was learning to budget her actual income instead of living on family subsidies. Most importantly, she'd stopped expecting me to solve her financial problems. My parents had downsized their lifestyle significantly. They'd moved to a smaller house, reduced their entertainment spending, and Dad had taken a part-time consulting position to replace the income they'd lost when I stopped subsidizing their expenses. The social consequences had been substantial. Several family friends had distanced themselves after learning how they'd been treating me, and their reputation in extended family circles was permanently damaged. Mom had eventually provided a genuine apology, not for tactical reasons, but because she'd been forced to confront the reality of their treatment of me. Clara, I never understood how much we were taking from you, or how cruel we'd become, she admitted during one of our supervised coffee meetings. I convinced myself that asking you to pay was normal family support, but it was systematic exploitation. I'm ashamed of the mother I became. Dad's transformation was more gradual, but equally real. Having to work again at 68 had given him perspective on the value of the money they'd been casually extracting from me. I forgot how hard it is to earn a living, he said quietly. We were spending your 20s like our personal funding source. That was theft, not family support. Most importantly, the power balance had shifted permanently. Family dinners now involved separate checks and mutual respect. Kate had developed enough independence to contribute meaningfully to conversations instead of just posing for photos. My parents sought my advice on financial decisions instead of assuming I'd cover their mistakes. The total financial impact was exactly what I'd calculated. Over $104,000 kept in my own accounts instead of subsidizing their lifestyle. I'd used the money to increase my investment portfolio, take a European vacation, and establish an emergency fund that actually served my needs instead of everyone else's crises. My professional reputation had been enhanced rather than damaged by the situation. David regularly referenced my strategic thinking and boundary setting skills when recommending me for complex client situations. Patricia had referred several similar cases to me as an example of successful financial abuse recovery. The family relationships had been rebuilt on sustainable terms. We maintained regular contact, celebrated holidays together, and genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Because the interactions were voluntary rather than financially coercive, Kate had grown into someone I actually respected. My parents had rediscovered humility, and I had confirmed my ability to protect my own interests against emotional manipulation. The entire experience had taught me the most valuable lesson of my career. Systematic exploitation disguised as family obligation will continue until you demonstrate the power to end it permanently. My family had spent 26 years assuming I'd accept mistreatment to maintain relationships. One strategic confrontation had shown them that I valued my dignity more than their approval. And paradoxically, that revelation had finally made healthy relationships possible.